Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
Education Corner podcast would like to welcome Mrs. Donna Stevens, Chief Executive of the Girls' Schools Association. The Girls' Schools Association represents the heads of over 150 all-girls schools across the country and aims to help girls and their teachers to flourish. The GSA represents and advocates for girls' education in the UK and internationally through their community support, resources and research. Donna has previously worked as a head of research at the Independent Schools Council before taking up her role at the GSA in 2021, helping to navigate through the challenges of the COVID pandemic in difficult time for the education sector overall. We're so pleased to have you on our podcast. Firstly, can you tell us about your background and how you came to the GSA?
I probably had a slightly interesting career journey to the GSA. So I did a maths degree at Oxford and got swept into the City of London as a new graduate in 2002, initially working in financial services with mergers and acquisitions, and then into more general management consultancy. I worked hard. I learned some really great transferable skills, but after nearly 10 years, it was time to move into an industry that I felt more passionate about. So I worked for a few smaller startups, charities to begin with, then on to the Independent Schools Council that you mentioned there, and then more recently to the Girls' Schools Association. So that's where I am today.
We work with lots of the GSA schools through our consultancy, but could you just give us a little bit more information about the ethos and values of the GSA?
So it all stems from our history, really. We were set up 150 years ago as part of a movement to provide equal education for girls. We had links to the suffragette movement at the time. Our previous leaders paved the way for girls in STEM, such as Beatrice Sparks, who was our leader in 1925. She was the first female to study maths at Oxford. Another one of our leaders, Harriet Jones, in 1887, lobbied to remove compulsory needlework for girls so they could study maths and science like their brothers. So those campaigning roots run deep today, and our alumni include people like Malala Yousafzai and Soma Sara, the founder of Everyone's Invited. And again, all our programs and all our work speaks to this ethos. So we have a big program of events for students, and it's designed particularly in areas where girls are underrepresented. So things like finance and engineering and male-dominated sports like football, as well as our research is all centered around girls' education. We lobby to the government on areas that disproportionately impact girls. So those campaigning roots from 150 years ago run all the way through GSA today.
And it's all very exciting stuff. Why do you feel that an all-girls education continues to be particularly important in the present day?
You mentioned earlier my background in research there, and the answer to that question is quite simple, really. The research and evidence for girls' schools is really compelling. It's all on our website, but let me just run through it with you. Girls in girls' schools do better academically. I think that's quite well known. And again, official Department for Education data shows that. Maybe what's less known is that girls in girls' schools are significantly more likely to study male-dominated subjects, so nearly 3 times as likely to do maths A-level at a girls' school compared to a co-ed school, twice as likely to do physics A-level, computer science and other sciences. Girls in girls' schools are more likely to stay engaged with sport for longer. Generally, nationally, there's a huge problem for girls and sport and dropping out around puberty, but not in a girls' school. I think sport is so important for not just physical well-being, but obviously mental well-being as well. We have research that shows girls in girls' schools are more confident and emotionally intelligent. And this is based on a psychometric study that was developed at Manchester Metropolitan University about 40 years ago now. We have further studies that show that girls in girls' schools have higher levels of motivation, self-efficacy, metacognition, and well-being. Ultimately, society isn't equal, but our schools help to create a fairer society by empowering girls to enter these more male-dominated spaces.
And the GSA is now celebrating its 150th year. Could you tell us about the history of the association and how it has evolved, or frankly remain the same, just perhaps modernised in this time?
So I touched upon it at the start there, didn't I, with various leaders across the 150-year history. So it stems, from our roots as campaigners for equal education for girls. That remains true in GSA today. Thankfully, society has moved on, but there's still work to do, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of girls being underrepresented in financial careers or engineering or in leadership positions in big FTSE 100 companies. So a lot has not changed. Society has changed, but we're not quite there. So we're still on that journey.
On the GSA website, it states that you work with international organisations such as the International Coalition of Girls' Schools in the interest of girls' education worldwide. Could you tell us more about these partnerships and how you support girls' education internationally?
So it's really important for us that we link with the various international organisations, which include the European Association of Single-Sex Education, the South African Girls' Schools Association. A couple of summers ago, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Asia Pacific Summit on girls' education. It was a 48-hour trip to Tasmania, so I spent longer travelling there and back than I was there, but it was so important to be connecting with colleagues across the globe because ultimately there's so many similarities and so many things we can learn from each other. GSA foundations were around equal education for girls, but that started with the concept of collaboration. It was two headmistresses that got together that thought, you know what? I think there'd be real benefit if we brought all the headmistresses together, had a conference and shared latest thinking and best practice. Obviously, this was 150 years ago, so this would have been geographically just the UK, but now we have the beauty of sharing and collaborating globally, and it's right that we do that.
And so insightful. The GSA also conducts research into the impact of all girls' education, with your most recent piece of research being investigating the role of girls-only schools in preparing students for their future endeavours. Could you tell us more about this research and your findings?
So the aim was to give voice to stakeholders across the generations, from the youngest pupil in year 5 to alumni of our schools from over 30 years ago. We had over 8,000 responses. We reached over 150 separate girls' schools across the UK. And we had some great findings from those different stakeholders. Our teachers spoke frequently about being able to tailor their lessons to the needs of girls and also the ability to inspire girls with female role models. And these were the top 2 reasons why our teachers love working in our school. The third actually was around less behavioural issues that they experience. And 97% of those teachers surveyed had experience in other types of schools, so were responding from a good basis of comparison. Our parents who responded to that research spoke about the academic excellence, which I mentioned earlier as well, and also confidence. And again, we know that from our research, but it was great for us to know that our parents feel this too. And it's not just the data and stats, it's the feeling amongst the parent community. Our alums spoke about how their girls' school time had really shaped their life path. Our girls instantly, or not instantly actually, maybe demonstrated how financially aware they were. And this is something our schools feel really strongly about, is empowering our girls to understand finances when they're older, which is often a gap in the curriculum more generally, actually. But also, and rightly so, we wanted to use the research as an opportunity to ask what more can we do? Because as a sector, we've not stood still over 150 years and we've still got work to do. And we want to know what that is, so that what we can be doing in our 151st year and beyond. One thing that came up was social media, which typically disproportionately impacts girls. But what's great about our schools is that we can address this through the girls' lens and not in a lesson, for example, where maybe boys are in the room. Yeah, I mean, the research is brimming with data and insights. It's fully published now on our website, so do take a look and get in touch if you'd like to know more about any of the findings there.
And GSA schools also offer a range of bursaries and scholarships, spending over 146 million a year on fee assistance. How important are these scholarships and bursaries in supporting the GSA's ethos and values, and what impact do you feel they have on the pupils?
So it's so important. Firstly, it's really important that our schools are diverse and that cost isn't a barrier. In terms of the impact on these pupils, I think it's really important for people to understand that it's impact on those pupils that receive the bursaries, but also on the other girls that are in our school, because it's important that they meet and interact with a diverse range of students as well. And it's not just bursaries, but other things our schools do around partnerships, whether that's seconding teachers or supporting schools with university entrance. And again, to make that point that, these partnerships are mutually beneficial. There are things that we can teach some schools, but equally there's things we can learn as well.
And obviously the big issue that we were lucky enough to speak to Master James Dahl at Wellington College about the government imposing the VAT. At the GSA conference last week, GSA President Alex Hutchinson said that the introduction of VAT on school fees could have a seismic impact on girls' life chances. Do you have anything further to add to that?
What Alex said and what I also said at the same conference is right, unfortunately. So girls' schools are more prevalent in the independent sector. So any policy that disproportionately affects independent schools will therefore disproportionately affect girls' schools overall. The sector will shrink. And for all the reasons above, that we know why girls' schools are so needed for girls in creating a fairer and more equal society, anything that limits that choice is a step back for equality.
And how do you then see the introduction of VAT beyond what you said impacting girls' education, and how are you supporting the schools and parents that you work with through this change?
So we work with partner organisations, one of them being the Independent School Bursars Association, who are producing lots of guidance for schools, because this policy has been implemented from January and it's important our schools know what they do. This is a new policy. It's been imposed on schools, which are often very small, and are little small businesses that have not worked with VAT before. It's important that we're helping to facilitate those resources for them. And then obviously, you will be aware of the legal challenge that GSA in collaboration with ISC is leading on. But obviously, I can't talk any more about that because we're not going to litigate in the media. We're trusting our lawyers there to do their job. So it's hard for me to expand further on that one.
And what's your plans or hopes going forwards beyond that for the future of the GSA and girls' education more broadly?
Well, yeah, funny you mentioned that, because we recently produced a film celebrating our 150 years and documenting our journey. But what was really clear in that film is that we still have work to do. And I think I've said that probably already in some of your previous questions. Just one example, I recently responded to the curriculum review on behalf of the sector, and in particular around gender diversity, where there are significant gaps. So for example, GCSE A-level and A-level history and the absence of women's historical significance. So at GCSE, one of our students quickly noticed that while she was studying the Russian Revolution, the rise of the Nazis, the Cold War, that very rarely, if at all, did she encounter a named woman or even narratives of women. And that when women are mentioned, it's often a bit clunky. It feels like an add-on, it's not integrated. So, for example, one module, Medicine Through Time, discussing the medical evolution in Britain from around 1850 to 1950. One of the themes was women in medicine. So it was just a complete add-on and not sort of integrated through that whole module. At A-level, another student further observed that there's a textbook, Great Britain and the Irish Question, and it has over 40 named men in the index and only one woman, which is Elizabeth I. So the men we learn about in history are politicians, they're kings, they're scientists, they're artists, they're clergymen, the brave, the cowardly, the strange, the ordinary, any type of man basically you can think of. But that's not the case for women. And this is just one example, history. We can find similar examples across the whole curriculum. That's just the curriculum in British schools. And let's not forget internationally, where things look even worse for girls in some areas. I don't know if you saw, but speaking at the UN headquarters in New York a few weeks back, Oscar winner Meryl Streep observed that household pets and rodents have more rights than girls in Afghanistan. A cat may go and sit on her front step and feel the sun on her face. She may chase a squirrel into the park. In Afghanistan, public parks have been closed to women and girls. There's a lot of work to do, and I've gone from smaller ones that maybe we can fix there in terms of curriculum reform to, big ones that we're facing in Afghanistan. But yeah, lots of work to do, and we'll continue on that journey until it's done.
Well, you're fully supported by our Education Choices magazine, and we think the work you're doing is fantastic. So thank you very much for sharing so much about the work taking place.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.